And now, the Lowe Post.
Welcome to the Lowe Post podcast on a Monday afternoon where the scorching Phoenix Suns just fended off Point Dort and beat the Oklahoma City Thunder to go 6-0 in the bubble. Let me tell you this. One of the great pleasures of going out to Los Angeles to do the jump is exchanging small talk with NBA diehard Mike Schwartz, one of our ace researchers at ESPN, always about the Suns. Mike is, I think, the only Suns fan I actually know, and his optimism, every time I go to LA, he's so happy and optimistic about the Suns, and I've seen him beaten down time and time again. But my friend, your optimism has paid off. The Suns, if they went out, will finish at 34 and 39. They need help, but at least they give themselves a shot. So, are you sleeping? Are you on a bender? How are you celebrating this? Bender, no pun intended. Bender, I'm sorry I said bender.
I'm not on a Chris either, I can tell you that much. I've put those years way behind me. But yeah, Zach, this is the most exciting Phoenix Suns basketball has been for 10 years. I'm used to rooting for lottery balls at this time of the year. That's what I've been doing most of the last decade. So to watch this team actually having a chance, if they beat Philadelphia tomorrow, they'll go down to the final day with a chance to make the playoffs. Never would have thought that when the league went on to hiatus.
Well, look, first of all, we scheduled this podcast yesterday, and then Oklahoma City sat everybody but Chris Paul in their starting lineup. And I sent you an email saying, hey, if they're up like 30 in the fourth quarter, we can start recording early. And I hit send on that. And then Deandre Ayton misses his COVID test, or the news comes out that he misses his COVID test and he's not playing. And I'm thinking, this is too cruel for Phoenix Suns fans. If they lose to the junior varsity Thunder and Chris Paul, who apparently will just never not play, in part because the franchise center, the guy they selected over Luka Doncic, who, by the way, I'm losing some sleep over that, but I'm not losing Vlade Divac's level sleep over that. Missed his COVID test. That would be a blow. That would be a bridge too far for me. And then, of course, he comes to the game, and I'm picturing, I think he should have had to be driven to the game in a golf cart by somebody dressed as one of the Disney characters. I want to see Mickey or Goofy driving Deandre Ayton in a high-speed golf cart across the campus.
Yeah, that's really inexcusable. You've got 3 games left. They're all must-wins, and the franchise center misses a COVID test. You're thinking, what do you have to do? Obviously, we've seen guys are fishing. I'm sure video games are being played, but I really don't know how you miss a COVID test when that's literally the one thing you have to do on a day off.
It's not great. He came in and played pretty well today. I think DeAndre Ayton's had a nice bubble performance, and even today, the thing I'm always watching for him is how often can we get him rolling super hard to the rim. And today he had a bunch of he got a tip out of it. He got an offensive rebound dunk. And defensively, he held his own switching on to Chris Paul. Chris baited him into a little touchy elbow foul one time. But I don't know that I've seen a bigger leap on defense from a big man from year 1 to year 2 than DeAndre Ayton. I've been saying this all year. I don't think he's great or whatever, but I think he's an average-ish starting center, which is pretty good.
Yeah, and going back to U of A, he's always had the quick feet. He's able to at least do a reasonable job against the small guys out on the perimeter, and I think that's just so important. He's a guy who's not going to be played off the court per se because he can't guard the perimeter. And then the rim defense, that's the huge thing. He was one of the worst bigs at rim defense last year, giving up 56%. This year he's down to 45%. And if he can continue that trajectory, and to me it's all the defensive awareness. He still gets caught napping at times, not the best in that regard, but I think that might be the key. Can he become, going from now a bad defensive center to an average one, if he can become a good one? Because that's what this team's going to need if you really want to become a contender.
So when the news came out that he missed his test, did your optimism wane? Did you think this is really destiny, that we're going to crumble because of this against the Thunder teams, or were you like, you know what, if he's out the whole game, Frank the Tank, let's go, fire up the Frank tank. Kaminsky didn't even play today, and we're going to be fine.
No, I've never want to fire up the Frank tank. I'm still a U of A guy, so I'm a little bit sour over that Elite Eight loss. But honestly, if they were facing any starting center other than Mike Muscala, I might have been a little bit concerned. But I had a feeling Dario Saric would be able to hold his own against Muscala. And honestly, my first reaction, like you said, Zach, trying to always go to the positive. Suns have a back-to-back tomorrow. We don't know if Joel Embiid's going to play or not. I wanted Ayton to be nice and rested to face Philly tomorrow.
Well, he's going to be nice and rested even though they played today because Oklahoma City, eventually reality set in. And so this is your problem going forward, right? Is the Suns need to win out. I mean, they don't actually need to win out, but realistically they absolutely have to win out. And Philly, maybe they get without Embiid and all of that, but you're counting on, Portland has the Mavs and the Nets. The Mavs are like massively important to you guys because you play the Mavs and so does Portland. And their last game is against the Nets. Memphis has Boston and Milwaukee, and it's like they could go 0-2, 1-1, 2-0. It's like we have no idea. Giannis is not playing tonight for the Bucks as we're taping this now. We don't know what that. So you're dependent on a lot of things that are out of your control, which is your punishment for being whatever you were, 26-39 coming into the bubble. But it's just, this must be, you must be in heaven. This has been, and by the way, they've been legitimately really fun to watch. There's no question about that.
Yeah, and all you can do is take control of what you can. As any team has, the Suns have lost so many winnable games. They had a tough one against Portland earlier in the year that came down to some questionable blocking call. And there's so many games you can look at. But yeah, if you go 8-0, I still would be just super optimistic because the Suns will then go ahead and have the 10th best lottery odds. So you might take this, then go into the lottery, have a 20% or so chance of moving up and go ahead and getting one of those top prospects. So I feel like the good juju would be there for the Suns. If they actually went 8-0 and missed this by one game, that I'd be waiting for lottery night and saying, yeah, the luck's going to come back around that way.
Well, lottery night has been a little dicey for the Suns in 7 or 8 years. Or not lottery night, I should say draft night. So let's zoom out because here are the Suns now in 2020, August 2020, the sensation of the league. October 2013, they make an organizational decision to tank. Right, they trade Gortat to Washington for a first-round pick. Everyone's like, Ryan McDonough is the new GM. They're tearing it down. Finally, Sarver is going to tank. They accidentally win 48 games and almost make the playoffs. However, my point is this. From 2013, accidental tanking after the Lance Blanks regime, which was the disaster, to 2020, sensation of the league, you could not possibly, in infinity tries, replicate how the Suns got from point A to point Z. There are so many crazy events and turning points, and really, the process was not exactly smooth. They made a lot of mistakes, and the NBA can be forgiving because you get high picks when you're bad, and they got a really good player at number one. They also missed on a lot of high picks. So again, let's take that timeline from accidentally not tanking but trying to tank 2013 till now. What are some moments that stand out from you, or what lessons can other teams look at this and be like, well, that was a mistake, or that actually worked out okay? What stands out to you?
Well, I think the biggest thing is they had so many bites at the apple. They get made fun of all the time for the missed lottery picks, and of course, 2016, you pick Dragan Bender at 4, you trade up to get Marquise Chris, you trade away Bogdan Bogdanovic in that deal, and both of those guys complete bust. The next year, you pass on De'Aaron Fox, Larry Markkinen, and you go ahead and draft Josh Jackson, which was a complete disaster. But then you keep having enough bites at the apple, eventually you're going to hit on something. And the biggest pick, obviously, was the number 13 pick in 2015 when you hit on Devin Booker. And that's kind of the key going forward, that since 2015, it's really been all about how can you build a team around Booker. And they swung and missed several times, finally win the lottery in 2018. And no, they didn't pick the right guy. Luka Doncic is already an MVP candidate, but they did pick a guy who I think is going to be a really good number 2 who works well with Book, and Deandre Ayton. And then in that same draft, to zoom back out to the 2015 trade deadline when the Suns did all sorts of crazy stuff.
Unbelievable.
In my head, I was at dinner or lunch with my dad, and we just had no idea who was even on the team by the end of that. They traded Goran Dragic to Miami. They got 2 future first-round picks, but then they also traded away Isaiah Thomas for pretty much nothing to Boston before he became an All-NBA type guy. And they acquired Brandon Knight and eventually signed him to a long-term deal, which obviously was a disaster. But those 2 picks, they traded on 2018 draft day, right after acquiring Deandre Ayton, and they got Mikal Bridges out of that. And I'd say Mikal Bridges would be a perfect fit on any team, but he's a guy who's always going to take the best perimeter offensive player. He's becoming a decent 3-point shooter, really good slasher, just a perfect high-level role player. And then this last draft, the last offseason was kind of interesting for the Suns. A lot of pundits made fun of it because if you look at each deal
including me, by the way, I made fun of it. I made fun of it.
And that's totally fair. You should have made fun of it. I mean, they had to trade away the 32nd pick in the draft to get rid of TJ Warren, which honestly I was okay with because the guy averages 1 assist per game. He still averages 1 assist per game.
But he's also averaging like 1,000 points per game in the bubble.
Yeah, the last 5 games. But
it's interesting. It's interesting you say that because I think the Suns lost no sleep over it. I don't think any of their fans are losing sleep over it. And when you have success like this, it's easy to be like, well, I mean, objectively, that's a bad trade. Now, they traded him for cap space, really, right? And they used the cap space in ways that have essentially worked. That said, you shouldn't have to incentivize a team to take TJ Warren. Like, TJ Warren has actual trade value much more now than he did a year ago. But even if like the result is okay, there's an opportunity cost to a deal like that. Just like there's an opportunity cost to salary dumping Josh Jackson on Memphis and also DeAnthony Melton, who's good, although Javon Carter is playing really nicely for them off the bench. Anyway, please continue.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's another deal, obviously bad value deal. And the other deal they made, they traded the 6th pick, which that was after some poor lottery luck. You would have thought they had one of the best chances to go ahead and move up. So then moving to 6 was kind of a disappointment. And then you trade down to 11, get Dario Saric and pick Cam Johnson, who absolutely nobody had at 11 on their board. And it's actually turned out that he might be the perfect kind of stretch 4. He's a lights-out 3-point shooter, really smart player. He's, I think, one of the oldest players in the draft. He's older than Devin Booker, which is kind of insane. Since
Devin Booker is like just barely 23 years old.
Right.
It's insane how good Devin Booker is.
Yeah.
That's the one thing I've been consistent on all along, even making fun of the Suns. I am a long-time holder of all the Devin Booker stock I can buy. And I'm not cashing it in. I'm keeping it because I think he's going to keep getting better.
Good. I mean, you're going to get quite a return on that investment. You're going to get some All-NBA appearances out of that. Possibly should have even been this year if they hadn't done the voting. He would have made it
this year if they had kept it. Which it's ridiculous that they didn't count the seeding games. I've been consistent about that, and he is the single biggest individual loser because he would have made All-NBA. He was on the fringe of my 6th and final spot, which I gave to Ben Simmons, and I'm telling you right now, if they had included these games, 100% I'm flipping Booker in for Ben Simmons.
Yeah, there's no question about that. And Cam Johnson he's just really blossomed throughout the year, and he's the kind of lights-out shooter that you just can't leave. So if you have Booker and Ayton to start, you put Bridges around him, you put Cam Johnson, and then Rubio is the final piece. And you were saying this on the pod with Kevin Arnovitz. If you have poor point guard play, you're just not going to win in this league. And the Suns went 2 years with just an awful point guard situation. So whatever you think of Rubio, just a really steady, professional, really solid point guard. It was just a massive improvement from what they had. So that was kind of the final piece to it. And now they have a good starting lineup. Their bench was terrible in the regular season. That's why they were 26-39. It's been a lot better in the bubble. But Campaign. He's been a revelation.
What in the blue hell got into Campaign? A guy who was a punchline. Like the Bulls gave up assets for trading for Campaign and are still being made fun of to this day. Yeah. And he's just knocking down every open 3. So think about what you just said for a second. For 2 years, the Suns had absolutely horrible point guard play.
Correct.
Now, zoom back out
Yeah.
and think about how funny that
going.
is.
Yeah.
Because when they signed Isaiah Thomas to an incredible contract, they then had 3 starting level point guards who were all instantly miserable and were like, I don't want any part of this. And if you, I don't know, I can't remember a lot of franchises who had, like, let's say a 6-month period like the Suns had from January 2015 till summer 2015. Because let's review what happens. They trade Dragic for the 2 Heat picks.
Yep.
Great trade. Dragic is on an expiring deal. He doesn't want to be there. Objectively great trade. If you hit the brakes right there,
I know.
life is pretty freaking good. You don't hit the brakes right there. You dump Isaiah Thomas for nothing. Now, Suns defenders will tell you, not incorrectly, that dumping Isaiah Thomas for nothing helped them help them lose enough games to get Devin Booker in the draft.
Yeah.
Which, sure, I guess. I mean, what a freaking bizarre world we live in when that's the way you can defend a trade. And then they trade what at the time was the most coveted trade chip in the NBA, probably a very lightly protected Lakers pick for Brandon Knight, which went poorly. And that's just such a bewildering series of events. And I remember thinking at the time, everybody knew the Suns were on the hunt for a wing and a young wing. And that's what they were trying to get with the Lakers pick. And you looked around the league and you couldn't find any. Like, there just weren't going to be any that were available for that price, that were worth that pick and available. And so you could almost talk yourself into, like, okay, I get what they're saying. He's a borderline all-star. He's young. Like, it makes a little bit of sense, but everybody knew it was the price was too high. Then that summer, they signed Tyson Chandler, who's 30 whatever years old, drag his ass into their free agent pitch meeting as a surprise with LaMarcus Aldridge, who's whatever years old. Don't get LaMarcus Aldridge, and then just have Tyson Chandler on their team for some reason. And yet here we and then after that is all the draft picks you just mentioned. And yet here we are, and I find myself like, how in the hell did this happen? This is insane. How did it happen? I guess Booker's good and Ayton's good, and you go from there.
I mean, I think that's exactly it. Booker's that good, and then, like what Philly did, you just want as many bites of the apple as you can. So, okay, Dragan Bender, he didn't work out. Marquise Chris, he didn't work out. Josh Jackson, and guess what's happening while these guys are terrible? You're still losing so many games that you're getting choice picks. So that eventually leads you to Ayton, and that led you to this draft where you're able to get Cam Johnson and Dario Saric out of it, who are two critical pieces to what they're doing now. So you said, is it replicable? I don't know if you'd want to repeat it. The only thing you want to repeat is to get Devin Booker, and then you can figure it out from there and figure if you try enough times after that, it'll work out. And a lot of credit to James Jones because, like we said, last offseason didn't get the best reviews from people like you, Zach, but he's put a team that made sense. Even going ahead, getting Aaron Baines, really steady center, he kept them decent while Deandre Ayton was out for 25
by the way,
games.
that's a move I didn't like either because I thought they did.
Yeah.
They had Rashawn Holmes under contract for nothing. Rashawn Holmes is good.
Well, he was a free agent.
Didn't they have an option on him or something?
But he may have been an RFA. So, they could have kept him if they wanted him.
And then they got Baines instead. But Baines was, like you said, I mean, there were reasonable people being like, is Aaron Baines better than DeAndre Jordan? Like 7 months, whenever the season was going on, they were like, maybe the Suns should just keep starting Aaron Baines.
DeAndre Ayton.
DeAndre Ayton, yeah.
Definitely better than DeAndre Jordan right now.
Yeah, that's not close. It's really an incredible path, but their team does make sense. And an underrated deal was the deal to get Oubre, who's not playing right now and is not the shooter everyone thinks he is. But they got Oubre for Ariza, who didn't want to be there, and that is a home run trade. That's a predatory trade. That's looking at a Wizards team that's desperate, that thinks Trevor Ariza is the solve for all their wounds, salve, however you say that, and can heal their locker room and all that, and fleecing them, and like that was a good trade, but that 7-year period is as wild as it gets. And like we haven't even mentioned the hair salon and Earl Watson getting fired 3 games into a season for reasons that are like still not murky, but like subject of lots of rumors and speculation. I mean, I don't know how you made it through, Mike, with your optimism intact.
I mean, Devin Booker was a big reason why. You could see, to me early on, I forget if it was his second or third year, but there was a game in Philly where they just couldn't guard him. He was making wild threes from everywhere. And I just thought, this guy, he is that good. The first year, I wasn't sure. I mean, you saw some of the playmaking starting to come along, but he's just improved rapidly every year. So I think having that guy now in year 5 has certainly made it a little easier, where you said, what's the toughest thing in building a team? It's finding that number one scorer, right? So you have that, you figure you'll be able to find the rest of the stuff eventually. And like I said, just rooting for lottery balls. I did a lot of that over the last 5 to 7 years.
He's even better than I thought he would be at this stage, Booker. Like, as optimistic as I was, he's better than I thought. What's changed for them in the bubble? Why are they destroying everybody in the bubble? What's changed?
Honestly, I think it's the bench, because they really didn't have one during the pre-bubble time. The Suns' best on-off differential was Ricky Rubio. They were about 10 points better when he was on than off. And that's largely because who was coming in when you had your Elliot Kobos of the world, even Javon Carter when he was just the point guard, certainly Ty Jerome, who struggled quite a bit as a rookie. Now all of a sudden they're a plus when Rubio's out of the game. Every game it feels like Cam Payne is going off and running off 10 quick points. In the Miami game, it was Javon Carter who hit a bunch of threes. And then Dario Saric has become kind of one of the anchors of the bench. He's giving you 14 or so points off the bench every night, and now all of a sudden he's been enormous.
Center. And so again, they got criticized by, I mean, I don't know the draft well enough, but everyone who does told me it was ridiculous to pick Cam Johnson at 11.
Yeah.
And so they trade the 6th pick, which becomes Jared Culver, for Cam Johnson and Dario Saric, who is a free agent this summer, and do, I guess, a pay raise. But Dario Saric, after getting lost for a while, this is a big subplot to me. Dario Saric was not out of the rotation, but becoming a bit player in the rotation. Right. And it had the feel of one of those things like, oh, he'll just leave in free agency for nothing. It was a failed experiment. And now he's essential as a backup center, backup power forward, started today. He's making shots, he's making plays, he's defending pretty well. Like, he's a good player, and to rediscover that guy has been sort of an underrated part of why they're 6-0.
Yeah, no question. And you saw it even in the exhibition games. He just came out firing. You could tell he knows he's a restricted free agent, and he's trying to make that RFA money in what's going to be a pretty cold market. So having him and Cam Payne, and then even Javon Carter, they've had a good bench, and that's really been the difference, because the starting 5, when you have Oubre in instead of Cam Johnson, they were plus 20 per 100 possessions. It was one of the best lineups for the entire season. Obviously, you had 25 games with no Ayton. But this team, when their guys were in, they were pretty decent all year. It's just been the bench was a complete tire fire, and now the bench has turned that into a positive. So I think finding Cam Payne, like you said, rediscovering Saric, those were the 2 key points that they were so different. And Booker's maybe taking his game to another level, but I mean, the guy was averaging 26 and 6. He was already pretty much at that level. It's just when everything else comes together, you can see it more, and then you get things like the last second shot against the Clippers.
And I don't think Booker is good defensively, but like I remember maybe a year ago there was a lot of like when Zach LaVine started to pop in Chicago. Yeah, you would hear a lot of Booker contrarians be like, "Well, I don't get what the difference is between Booker and Zach LaVine. Like they're scoring gunners on terrible teams. They're bad at defense." And I would say, and I think I even said this on a podcast once, like, yeah, I agree Booker's not good defensively, but like he knows where to be and how to play and how to position himself. He knows like the patterns of the opposing offense. He can recognize them in real time. I think he'll try harder on a good team when they get the coaching situation stabilized. And LaVine is just, he's a competitor. And when you talk to him about defense, it's actually astonishing how he's very smart about it. Like he knows the playbooks, but like that doesn't translate to the game. He's just totally out of sorts in a way that Booker is not. They're 3rd in the bubble in defense. Again, this is before today's game. They've actually been quite good at limiting opponent threes all season, and their rim defense has improved a lot. And they haven't been turning the ball over until today when they fell behind turning the ball over a lot, which of course helps your defense. And they've been what's really interesting is they've been defensive rebounding again until today. They had like one of the top 2 or 3 defensive rebounding rates in the league, which you look at their starting line for the bubble. I mean, when you look at their starting lineup, you would think, well, that could be a weak spot, and it hasn't been. And that lineup is you can probably recite the stats to me. It's plus a lot in very little. It's like plus 50 in 100 minutes or something like that.
Yeah. It's the fourth best. They're plus 15.5 per 100 possessions, fourth best in the bubble now, with Cam Johnson instead of Oubre, obviously. So really, it almost doesn't matter who you put with the other 4. They've been really good this year.
What do you think? Let's assume they don't make the playoffs because the math is still against them.
Yeah. Yep.
What do you think are the important next steps for them as a franchise to make sure this is not one of those things where a team makes a leap and then it doesn't continue? Because it's not always linear. However, if you have Booker and Ayton at their ages, it should continue. But what are you focused on as a fan and a very smart fan of this team?
I mean, I think the biggest thing is you need to really figure out the bench. This has been a great flash in the pan, but it's been 6 games so far. So whether that means you got to re-sign Šarić, that's going to be key. You've got campaign under team control for 1 more year. So if you hope this isn't a mirage, and then maybe find 1 more bench guy who you can really rely upon. In theory, that would be the Oubre, but there's maybe 1 more shooter for the bench.
I do think it's interesting what happens to Kelly Oubre if he's just a bench player now, because this lineup has worked so well. And you mentioned before, Cam Johnson is a capital S shooter. He is not a guy who needs a ton of space. He's not a guy who needs to be open. That dude is a shooter, and Kelly Oubre is not. Kelly Oubre is an okay shooter, but like he's not scaring anybody. Right. And Cam has held his own defensively this year in a way that frankly nobody expected.
Yeah, I think Oubre is actually the biggest thing that I'm interested for this offseason. He's got 1 year left on his deal before he becomes an unrestricted free agent. I don't know if I'm going to want to pay him what he thinks he's worth, considering, like we said, we like the other 5 guys in the starting lineups. You got Ayton's extension coming up soon. You got Bridges coming up soon. So if he's not that guy, then you need to make that trade this summer and find somebody who maybe could be that long-term 6th man.
Do you trust Ayton? Do you trust Ayton?
I think you almost have to, Zach, just because there's no other choice. Obviously, like what happened today, some immaturity issues. I do trust that he's going to continue to get better defensively. I do trust that he's going to be the rare big man who can play in the playoffs. And the 3-point shot was kind of a revelation that came out of, I mean, we've been talking about it for 2 years, and finally he's starting to hit threes. So I trust him to be the number 2 guy. I don't know if he'd ever be the number 1 guy in a title team, but it's the guy's still in his 2nd year, so I'm gonna remain optimistic on him. But I see where you're coming from with that question, certainly.
No, I'm optimistic about him. On offense. I've said before, like, he's tricky to evaluate because for whatever reason with centers, we tend to put them into these boxes where you're a Tyson Chandler type, or you're a passing big man who facilitates from the elbows, or you're a stretch 5 like Brook Lopez or Miles Turner. Mm-hmm. And he's not any of those things, but he's got pieces of all of them. Right. And I think that's actually a strength. That's a very good thing. And the challenge is good. Like, he doesn't have to roll to the rim 60 times a game like Gobert. Mm-hmm. He doesn't have to shoot 8 threes a game like Brook Lopez. He can still do his half rolls, and you got to give him a couple post-ups here and there, even if he's going to fade away and never get to the line. But if you can just direct him 5% toward Tyson Chandler and 5% toward Brook Lopez, and that's it, then you're talking about a player who has a chance to be a superstar offensively and not just a really good player.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% because he can do all that. He's got the shooting touch. He's always had the soft touch for a big man. He's unstoppable rolling, which doesn't happen often enough. Like you said, he doesn't get to the line too often. That's something you'd hope he works on. He's not a guy you really throw the ball to in the post, although I guess almost nobody is these days, the way the NBA is going, except for Embiid maybe. So I agree with you completely. If he just gets 5% better at a couple of those areas, and then to me the biggest thing is the rim protection, because if you're going to be building a championship-level defense, you have Bridges, but you need that rim protector, and that's got to be him. And you got to go from being what you called him average he's got to become good or very good defensively, I think, for them to really take the next step from where they are fighting for the eighth seed to being more of a perennial playoff team.
You mentioned you were at dinner with your dad during the 2015 trade deadline. I was in the hospital. My wife had just given birth to our daughter the day before.
Oh, wow.
And so I will always remember that trade deadline. That's also the famous Woj "Dear Lord" tweet, because there were just too many trades to keep track of.
Yeah.
So is your dad a Suns fan?
Oh yeah.
Are you guys? Yeah. Is this been like? Where is he and where are you? And are you talking every day? Has this been a good father-son thing?
Yeah, definitely. I'm in LA. He's back in Phoenix, and I mean we've been. He grew up in Chicago, so he was a Bulls fan. But then ever since '93, we've been on the Suns bandwagon. I was 7 years old. Obviously, that was the year the Suns came back from the Westfall Guarantee, beat the Lakers after falling down 0-2, then played the Bulls in the finals and had John Paxson give me sports heartbreak for the first time, certainly not the last time. And it's been the Suns have always kind of been the one team that we've really watched together.
Yeah, the Suns have a weird thing where they're like, the last 5 or 6 years have been a little bit of a blip, but other than that, they've been consistently really good. And also, the level of heartbreak has been unusual. I guess if you're consistently really good, you're going to just run into a few of those if you never win. So you had the Ori hip check on Steve Nash. You have 93 finals. You have the 2010 conference finals against the Lakers where you're a couple random rebounds away from maybe going to the finals. I hope you're savoring this. I mean, again, the math isn't friendly, but who knows? There's still hope. Like, no one thought there would be any hope.
Right. No one thought that. And honestly, Zach, it kind of feels to me like the NCAA tournament because every game it's felt like if you lose, you're out. And that wasn't the math exactly at the beginning, but that's how it's felt every win. It's like, okay, you advance, you go to the next day, and you got to hope you get enough help. And, so far, early part of the bubble, New Orleans was losing every game. Sacramento was losing. Portland lost at least 2 by now. They've gotten a bunch of help. They just need one more tiny bit of help. So it's been so fun largely because it was unexpected. I know some prominent ESPN writers didn't even think they should be invited to the bubble.
Me, I said it. I copped to it in my column. Yeah. And by the way, I stand by it because the NBA was supposedly like, we got to limit the number of potential viral hosts. Like, we're very concerned about the number of bodies that are there. I'm like, well, if you're concerned about the number of bodies, the Wizards should not be here. And the Suns, who entered with a less than 1% chance of even finishing 9th. And they've proven me. I don't even think I was wrong, frankly, for that stance, but they've proven everybody wrong. It's extraordinary. It's one of the best stories. It's a story, frankly, like we all needed something fun, man. We all needed something fun, and like they've been awesome.
And the big thing, you hope it's the springboard because you can kind of see what they are now. There have been glimpses of it throughout the season. They did start 5-2 with a big win over the Clippers. They did beat Milwaukee without Giannis right before the break, put up a huge scoring game. So we've seen glimpses of this team actually looking really competent this year, but never this kind of a stretch. They've never won more than 6 games since in the last 10 years. The 9-10 conference finals team was the last team to do that. So
to win 6 straight,
to win 7 straight.
7 straight.
They haven't won more than 6 straight since then.
I said this when Kevin Pelton and I drafted teams for the last preview podcast I did of the restart. I drafted the Suns, and I said, if there's one team in the West next year, again, this is before the restart, that is going to have expectations to take a leap and a sizable one, like an 8. I think I said 8 wins or something like that. It's Phoenix, and they should have those expectations. I think they have found a team. Like, you can quibble about the process getting there, and we've quibbled, and there's a lot of quibbling to do. But they have found a team structure that makes sense. And I think, look, I don't think they're going to win 50 games next year, but I think this is like a legitimately pretty decent team.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like I said, they've got to figure out the bench because that's been a huge issue all season, and stay healthy, keep improving with their guys. But they've really found something with the starting 5. They fit well off each other. You got a lot of shooters all over the place. And defensively, like we said, they've been really, really good in the bubble.
The other big question is, what do they do when Rubio's contract comes up, which is not for a bit, but like what does their point guard position look like in 3 years or 4 years. But any thoughts on that? Is that just too far off at this point?
Yeah, I think it's too far off. Looking 2 years in advance, he's got 2 years under contract after this one. If they do miss the playoffs and move up in the lottery, I think that could be your answer, certainly. But otherwise, no, I think you can't look that far ahead just because we don't know. Obviously, 2021 free agency seems like everybody's a free agent. If they don't spend much this summer, they'll have some cap space. So maybe that's the answer. But yeah, I think it's too early to really know. I don't think that player's on the roster right now, certainly. So I think you'd be looking outside the organization at this point.
You're not ready to max out campaign, tear up his contract, give him the max extension?
If he does this for 8 games, maybe 6 games, not yet.
All right, Mike, it's good to see your face, man. It really is one of the pleasures of going to LA is I run in there all harried and like behind schedule, and there's always a smiling 30 seconds of Suns talk. And I've been thinking of you for 2 weeks now. So savor it. Thanks for making a little time for the Lowe Post, and fingers crossed you get a little luck for yourself here.
I appreciate that. We'll have to do this again when the Suns are in the finals.
There you go. Mike Schwartz, thank you. Yes, live sports are finally back, just like the rest of us. And now that we're all getting back on the road again, the stops we make seem more special than before, like stopping to watch the game at our friend's place with appropriate protocols, of course, or stopping at our favorite spot to cheer every amazing shot, score, and win, again with appropriate protocols. And between those stops, there's Shell. Stop in to fill up with Shell V-Power Nitro Plus Premium Gasoline. It's their best fuel ever, and it'll help keep your engine running like new. Stop in to save with the Fuel Rewards program. Just download the app or go to fuelrewards.com to join. You'll never pay full price for gas again. And finally, stop in to get snacks and essentials that can save you even more at the pump. That's just a few of the ways Shell helps you make the most of the stop you need to make. See full terms and conditions at fuelrewards.com and engines that continuously use Shell V-Power Nitro Plus Premium Gasoline. Goodyear believes that movement drives us forward, that every mile traveled brings us one step closer to our goals. But Goodyear also believes in the importance of a rest stop, taking a breather to pause and reflect on the road ahead. Sometimes that's all we need to keep going. A moment to compose ourselves before we start moving forward again. So as you get ready to start moving again, Goodyear's here to help. Visit Goodyear.com to learn more. Goodyear, more driven. All right, welcome back to the Lowe Post podcast, where I am thrilled to be joined by yet another person with a boring hotel curtain as their background from Orlando, the one and only, the Hall of Famer, the legend, Doris Burke. How are you?
Doing great. Back in the bubble. Arrived yesterday after being here for 2 weeks, couple days off. I'm glad to be back.
Oh, the bubble. I don't have any FOMO about the bubble. You're feeling good. Everything's good. Job is good. You're getting used to the plexiglass and all that.
I am. It is an unusual angle and distance to call the game from, but I'm just so happy NBA basketball is back, and I'm amazed, Zach, to be honest with you, at a few things. Number one, the magnitude of what this league has been able to achieve, the cooperation they had between the Players Association and the league. You look no further than Major League Baseball and sort of what appears to be some distrust there. I don't know. I'm in awe of the logistics and how it came to fruition. And what I'm amazed at is how crazy the 8-9 situation is, but also 2 through 7 in the West. Like, it is so convoluted and jumbled. And I'm hoping you're going to take me through it because I'm confused.
Well, that's what we're on here to do. 2 to 7 in the West. But to your point about the league and the union, it is extraordinary. Shockingly, baseball's I guess their system is like the honor code. That didn't work. So the real test for the league and the union will be next season. And if they have to find one of these bubbly ways to do it, whether it's 3 bubbles, 4 bubbles, it can't be 1 bubble. That's not fair to the players. And that's setting aside the issue of salaries and what's going to happen to salaries that are already written in pen in the case of no fans. But let's not go there yet. Yes, 2 to 7 in the West. We know precisely 0 matchups in the first round in the Western Conference. And it appears everyone is trying to lose. For some reason. Houston, I think, is not playing Harden tonight. Denver went down the stretch without its guys last night and still almost beat a Lakers team that was trying to win. The Jazz played their starters other than Mitchell in the first half and then pulled them all at halftime and fell from ahead against Dallas. So let me just take you through a couple of scenarios. And this is making my head explode, and there's a chance that I'm going to be wrong about something. Currently, the Oklahoma City Thunder are 43-27 and in 5th in the West. They appear to be trying to lose, probably to keep their draft pick, which they owe to Philly, top 20 protected. If they lose out, they're 43-29. You with me so far?
Yeah.
43-29. Utah is 43-28. They have one game left against San Antonio. If they lose out, they're 43-29. They appear to be trying to avoid Houston because they're petrified of Houston. In doing so, they are now playing a very, very dangerous game where they could fall to 7th. Pelton has them in 7th in like 25% of scenarios, because this is like how crazy this is. If Dallas wins out, they go to 45-30. They've played extra games. By virtue of winning percentage, 45-30 is a better record than 43-29. Utah and Oklahoma City, if they lose out, then fall below Dallas. Even worse, 43-29, 43-29. Utah loses the tiebreaker to Oklahoma City, if I'm doing this right, because Oklahoma City has a 2-1 head-to-head advantage. And do you know why Oklahoma City has a 2-1 head-to-head advantage? In part, because the season stopped when Oklahoma City was about to play Utah. That would be a fitting ending to this horrible wackadoo year if that game ends up shoving Utah or playing a role in shoving Utah to 7th. And so what I'm saying, a dangerous game, is like Utah wants to avoid Houston. If in avoiding Houston, you end up playing the Clippers in the first round, that's an L. I don't care how bad of a matchup Houston is for you. That's an L. And so, Doris, the basketball gods sitting up on Mount Naismith at this time of year are normally on high alert for teams that are trying to monkey around with their playoff matchups, because the basketball gods will seek to punish such teams for intentionally losing games. They rewarded Denver last year because the basketball gods have that much respect. They love Nikola Jokic. They want to watch his game, so they let Denver pass. The basketball gods are watching this. They don't know who to reward and who to punish. Everyone is tanking. Everyone is trying to lose for various reasons. Matchups, the Thunder pick situation. Denver has all these injuries and guys recovering from COVID. They're trying to rest people. Perfectly legitimate, in my opinion, given what they're recovering from. And I think the last variable is there's no urgency among any of these teams to get in or out of the Lakers bracket. Like in some years you say, well, I don't want to be 4 because then I'm in the Lakers bracket. Denver telegraphed last night, they don't care if they're 4. Because if they're 4, if they fall all the way to 4, that means Houston's 3. I don't think they want to play Houston, but they can't anyway. And I don't think they really have any differentiation between Lakers black bracket, Clippers bracket. Teams view those, the other teams view the LA teams as roughly equivalent. So I don't know what the hell is going on, but I'll tell you this. If the Jazz end up 7th and they end up playing the Clippers, then the basketball gods will have inadvertently punished the Jazz for their tankery. So, Doris, I ask you, all of these teams doing this, do you feel like you've learned anything about any of them? Have any of them impressed you in the bubble? Have you learned any relevant information about any of these teams in the West?
Well, I would say that you could understand why the Jazz, in the absence of Bojan Bogdanovic, would try to be the team most likely to gerrymander a matchup in the first round, right? Because they had to figure out figure out who they are and how they win, understanding that they're always going to value spacing and three-point shooting and all those things without Bojan. But I felt like their ecosystem, their personnel was so shaky after their starters, Joe Ingles, even with Bojan Bogdanovic. Shaky may be the wrong word, but certainly there were challenges there. So I understood it. And I think you saw versus Denver, to me, like when they got out of the gate shooting the ball horrifically through their first 3 games, like below 30% from 3, I'm thinking, this is trouble. Like they're a mess. And then you see some glimpses of the spacing and the catch and shoot threes and all the things that make them successful. So I understood that. I saw something, I think you wrote something about their 9th man issue or whatever the terminology you called it was. How much pressure do you think is on Joe Ingles right now in whatever matchup they have. And if they're the Clippers, forget about it. And I understand them trying to avoid Houston. But like the play of Joe Ingles as they go into the playoffs, should they be able to get a matchup they think is good? Just
He's
how
huge.
important.
He's huge for them. But to your point, their new starting lineup, Conley, Mitchell, Ingles, O'Neal, Gobert, is plus 30 in 84 minutes in the bubble. The Jazz overall are minus 31. So that tells you how bad every single other lineup they've played in the bubble has been. They're getting destroyed by every other lineup is in. The Houston thing, I get it. They're sick of seeing James Harden. James Harden versus Gobert is a little bit of a tough matchup. I actually think that's been overplayed a little bit. I thought after the first couple of games in the playoffs last year where Utah was trying these really gimmicky defenses to try to stop Harden, that didn't really work. They settled in and they lost the rest of the series primarily because they couldn't make open shots, which is sort of like the thing that happens to Utah in the playoffs every year. They stop making open threes or decent threes. So the reason the Clippers, the Clippers could actually fall all the way to 4 in some scenarios. That's how wild this is. Houston could pass them. However, last night, if Denver had found a way to win last night with Bol and then Mason Plumlee guarding LeBron down the stretch. And by the way, Denver down 3 on the last play of the game went for a layup at the buzzer. Like, what are you doing? What are we even? And Bol missed. If they had won that game, it would be pure chaos. But now LA, the Clippers are very likely to get number 2, only because all they have to do is win once, regardless of what Denver does, regardless of what Houston does. And their last game against Oklahoma City is against Oklahoma City, which it doesn't appear to be trying super duper hard to win these games. So the Clippers will probably be 2, in which case 7 to me is just a place you don't want to be. I still think the Clippers are the best team. We haven't seen that team. Harrell hasn't played yet. Lou's only played a couple of games after the lemon pepper wings incident of 2020. Kawhi sat a game. PG sat a game. I just think that's a place you don't want to be. It's like Dallas could go all the way up to 5th. It's a complete. I guess it's just like all these teams are really good, and so.
Can we talk about Denver? Because sure. I find them fascinating. So the Michael Porter Jr. with the 2-man game of Murray and Jokic, and Murray has shocked me. Number one, the way they played with him and through him in his first game back, and how it went way past the minutes. And I was just shocked at how good he looked, Zach. I don't know. I just was shocked at how good he looked, at how much they played through him. What is the appropriate balance for Michael Porter Jr.? Michael Malone made a huge point to say, prepare for a 100-game grind. Obviously, it's, funky year to that. How tired Jokic was down the stretch, missing the free throw that he was, devastated about, and going into Michael Malone's office. How many field goal attempts is appropriate in a playoff scenario for Michael Porter Jr.? Do you ever trust him to handle the ball more? Is he capable of like Klay Thompson, 30-plus point quarters, that level hot? I mean, the shot making he did against LeBron James, elevation point, unbothered by somebody eating up his space. Like, how do you think he uses Michael Porter Jr. in the playoffs on the offensive end?
I think what is the expression? I think the horse is out of the barn. Is that what happens when something's the toothpaste is out of the tube? Something is out of something. And yes. I think that Michael Porter Jr. is going to start. I haven't talked to Mike Malone about it. I don't know where his head is. I'm not going to bug him about that from outside the bubble. I just think he's played too well. And I understand that he's going to make some positioning mistakes on defense. He's going to rotate when he shouldn't rotate, and then he's not going to rotate when he should on the weak side here and there and all that. He's also going to make up for some of those mistakes because he's huge and fast and can jump out of the gym. And, that's the gift of super duper athleticism. You can start from 10% behind and make it up in a way that, Will Barton can't because he's not as tall and he's not as explosive. Will Barton's a great athlete too. I just think the scoring is too prolific and the shooting is too prolific. And I said this with Jeff last week. Jokic is screaming out to play with shooting. Yeah. If you give the ball to Jokic at the top of the arc and your entire offense is just the other four guys screen and cut until someone comes open, well, he's supposed
to be LeBron-like.
He's the best passing big man ever in the NBA, period, full stop. He's going to find the right guy at the right time. And Gary Harris, 33% from deep the last 2 seasons. Will Barton, average. Millsap, stretch power forward, never happened. Not a good enough three-point shooter. Jamal Murray, for all the hype, 34% this year, I think 35% for his career. Now, I think Jamal Murray will become a 39%, 38% three-point shooter, but he's not right now.
I agree.
Jokic is begging for someone to pop out of those actions and just start draining threes. And I think at this point, Denver, with its current starting lineup with Barton and Harris, has been good. Very good. Actually, that's a good lineup. I just don't think they have enough pop to really have a realistic chance of getting out of the West. And it sounds ridiculous to say Denver getting out of the West. Guess what, man? That's your goal now. Like this cutesy stuff, you made the second round last year. You have a franchise player in his prime. You have a loaded team full of depth. Like, get some ambition. And I think they have some ambition. And Michael Porter Jr. brings a little bit of downside, but he raises their ceiling a little bit higher, starting and playing 30 minutes a game. And I'm ready for them to make that move.
So then the rest of the group, because it goes to, the Will Barton conversations last year, start, don't start, what's his attitude toward that, all of those things, Torrey Craig, like, just how you can play him defensively, who he creates problems for. Is this a circumstance where everybody on that team, in terms of its chemistry and non-talk, just except on certain nights, Craig has got to be on the floor and you hope that he makes enough shots because what he's providing defensively. It's been such a long, hard 2 years for Gary Harris, but is he still their best perimeter defensive player at times, and where does he fit into this? There's so many questions. And Denver is a fascinating team to me, and it's been a lot of fun to watch them and see Michael Porter Jr. and know where I was in October and asking Mike Malone where he fit. And Mike Malone, like the coach's coach, I feel like the trust factor is always big with him. Trust. Do I trust you? Do I trust you in these minutes? I guess that's the case for everybody, but it's interesting.
I get it. I mean, there's nothing that drives coaches more crazy than blowing defensive assignments, and like they'll over. And on the flip side, a lot of coaches will overlook everything else if they can rely on you on defense. If you can't make a shot, if you can't dribble, if you can barely walk on offense, but you can be relied upon on defense, they'll trust you. To me, it's too bad. Now Denver is still likely to get the 3 seed. Houston can pass them and get the 3 seed. So, but I just don't think Denver cares. Houston is like, Russ has sat the last 2 games. Harden sitting tonight. Gordon has not played at all in the bubble. Yet they're 4-1 now. They beat Milwaukee. That was an impressive win. No Bledsoe, but Giannis played. They beat the Lakers without Bron. They beat the Kings. Yeah. Total disaster for the Kings. Get out of the bubble. Goodbye. See you next year. And they had that crazy opening game against Dallas in double overtime or whatever it was. I guess I'm impressed with Houston going 4-1, given all the players that have missed games. Ben McLemore looks reliable.
He looks great. I've never seen that young man carry himself on a basketball court the way, he doesn't hesitate. He's lively, and the way he's making shots, and just, it's, it's so great because guys who seem to be teetering on the edge of being out somehow play for Mike D'Antoni and things look different. Is there too much on the shoulders of PJ Tucker on the defensive end of the floor? Can they overcome their, rebounding issues? Sometimes that scares me.
Their rebounding has been predictably bad since they went without a center. They've made up for it in all the ways that they are designed to make up for it, forcing a lot of turnovers and shooting a ton of threes. Like, they beat the Lakers in that game without Bron. Now, again, the Lakers without Bron don't generate threes, and they don't generate shots at the rim at nearly the same level. They shot 57 threes, and the Lakers shot 19. you just can't win. In the NBA in 2020, you cannot win shooting 1/3 as many threes as the other team. It's almost mathematically impossible. And I think it's very interesting. I don't think Utah is the only team that's a little bit scared of Houston. I think there are a few teams that if they had their druthers, whatever a druther is, if they had their druthers, they would prefer to avoid Houston. And I think it's really interesting. It's not like Houston has blown the doors off the league, but it's interesting that teams are wary of them because they're so different stylistically. They have a player in Harden who can just not only erupt for 50, but just sort of breaks every conventional defense and every rule of the NBA that has existed in the past. And they're just so different that like everyone is a little bit scared of them. And again, the math, like if they shoot 63s, if they make 25 or
Right.
22, it's not a great percentage, but the math becomes overwhelmingly on their side. They're a little bit of a scary team. I don't know what to make of their performance so far, but I think it's largely encouraging.
I mean, can they, this is a fascinating question to me because can they overcome, like, so in a matchup against size, I don't know. All right, let me ask you this.
Jokic is the one everyone wants to see because Jokic is the post scorer in the West who you can actually give the ball to.
Right.
And not only can he score, not only can he score in a way that's like bulldozing smaller guys, maybe not Tucker. Nobody can bulldoze PJ Tucker, but he can pass. And so, but I don't even think they're particularly scared about that because A, we'll front and double and do crazy stuff and force the other guys to make shots. And B, we're going to pick on Jokic every single time down the floor. We're going to find him and have his guys screen for Harden.
He has to guard every single time. Every single time they're just going to target. It'll be interesting. And what if Austin Rivers gets hot like, the other night?
41.
He has a stretch of a series where he's problematic for people. The Eric Gordon thing is a big deal to me. I just think, I agree. I'm intrigued by the atypical nature of what they do, but I just think you have to have everybody. And his shot making, the efficiency with which he gets it off, the range with which he shoots it changes things. I just think you need every shot maker at your disposal. McLemore's got to prove it in the playoffs. We're best case scenario for them, for the Rockets in your mind. Do you
best case scenario?
Think they come out? Do you think they have a legitimate shot to come out of the West?
I don't think they come out of the West, but those are two different questions. Am I picking them to come out of the West? No. Do I think they have a legitimate shot? If you define legitimate shot at like greater than 15%, yes, I think they have a legitimate shot to come out of the West. I've said
we all think the Clippers, right? I just think the Clippers have so much.
I'm interested. People are watching the Clippers, the Lakers, and the Bucks and saying, not as invulnerable as they were in March.
That's
and
right.
I'm just sort of like, I don't know. Like, I don't know which of those teams, pick any of them. Which of those teams are you actually worried about any of them? Or is their performance in these games, given the circumstances, is meaningful to you at all?
I think that's been the most difficult thing, is evaluating what the games mean relative to your playoff performance. And I'm not sure there's, on a nightly basis, Zach, I have to look at who's playing for how long. And as you made, you came on the podcast documenting now after the first week, all of the machinations of these teams, whether it's seeding, picks, matchups. It is so difficult to know. And it's interesting. I heard Nick Nurse talking about, and we haven't even touched on Toronto, who I think is so legitimate. I said on a game in the first week, I believe they are legitimate. And it's funny, in talking to Frank Vogel and before their matchup, he said, legitimate to come out of the East. He said, I think they're a legitimate team that can defend their title. But Nick Nurse was talking about having to have, through the first part of the opening games, having to play his starters so much because he wanted to get them in shape and find a rhythm with them. And there are so many variables that these coaches are dealing with, in their own teams, personnel, getting shape, getting rhythm, getting all these things. I'll be honest with you, I don't know what to expect. And I think that's pretty great.
Here's my worry meter. Not worried about the Clippers at all. Clippers are fine. Nothing about their performance has worried me. A little bit worried relative to what I was in March about both the Lakers and the Bucks. The Bucks just haven't looked quite not together. They just haven't looked the same to me in the bubble. At times they do. They haven't put together a full game yet that makes me think, all right, the Bucks are ready to go. Bledsoe, who's been an important part of their team, is just coming back from having COVID. They're finagling with different kinds of lineups. I think they're fine, but their performance has been – I'm not completely dismissing the fact that they've been meh in the bubble. Lakers, again, the lack of urgency is real, right? I mean, they have the number one seed. They essentially walked in with the number one seed. I do think losing Bradley and Rondo has hurt them more than a lot of the snickering, like all those guys don't matter. They matter just because of who has to play their minutes, and those players are worse than they are. And so, and their offense has been bad. Their offense when LeBron sits has been bad all year. It still is. So I'm a little bit worried, but I will say this. The number one seed, I think, still carries enormous benefits, particularly if Dallas is seventh. Now, I actually think Dallas has a really good chance to get out of seventh. For as well as Portland is, for all the Portland stuff, it's not even close to a guarantee that Portland is getting the eighth seed, period. Right. Memphis is still the mathematical favorite for it. And if the Lakers get Memphis, that should be a walkover. And Portland, they're the second worst defense in the bubble. They're playing as hard as they can with their very best lineups and Dame playing 40 minutes a game. And they're like squeaking out these games against teams that are half trying to win. I just don't really buy Portland as a super legitimate threat to the Lakers the way some people do.
I just want to go back to the point about Avery Bradley because – and maybe people snicker. I don't snicker because I just know how many points they generate in transition and how many points the Lakers generate off steals. And it just, in those playoff games where easy baskets matter, the pressure he applies at the point of attack. It's one game, but the shot making he had against the Clippers, et cetera, et cetera. I just think that's a big deal. That pressure at the point of attack, we've talked about Milwaukee, historically great, Zach, protecting the rim. Well, cycle out to the point of attack with Bledsoe and the pressure he applies and disruption and all of those things. Listen, winning NBA basketball games is hard. Winning a championship is hard. There's some luck required, but all your pieces are required as well. So I agree with you about the Avery Bradley. Have we hit the story enough? One thing that's fascinating that I just keep going back to in my head about the Lakers offense is something that Frank Vogel said to us before a game. He just casually mentioned how significant he thought Anthony Davis's three-point shooting would be to the ultimate success of the team. And I am just curious to watch that play out in the playoffs. He's such a devastating offensive force, but those two men have got to be great, and I mean great after the first round.
It's important because the construction of their team is he essentially has to shoot threes because they're playing 30-plus minutes a game with the traditional center on the floor. So he can't –
confident enough? Does he have enough equity in his own mind with his three-point shooting in the crucible of a playoff series to make it?
I don't think he does. If you're asking me point blank, I don't think he does. I think teams are going to live with Anthony Davis shooting above the break threes. And I don't think he's going to make enough. And I think if you keep leaving him open, he's going to second guess himself and take a dribble in and cycle over to the handoff over here if he misses a couple in a row. But I do think the Lakers and the Bucks have the air also of like, we're going to worry about them. And then game one of the playoffs is going to come and they're going to destroy these teams. Be like, oh, okay. These teams were just playing possum kind of this whole time. I especially kind of feel that way about the Bucks. And again, the Lakers first round matchup I think will be super favorable. Let me turn to Toronto Boston for a second. The most anticipated game of the bubble, I think, after opening night was Toronto Boston last weekend, and Boston wiped the floor with the Raptors. And as someone who is I'm a big Raptors believer. You are a big Raptors believer. Did that one game, and I believe Boston is now 3-1 for the season against Toronto, did that one game change your take at all about how a second round series between those teams might unfold?
I couldn't have been more impressed. Kemba Walker seems to be marching toward wellness, and that's significant. Listen, you have, 4 guys on the perimeter. You're because of Toronto's level of defense, you need what the Boston Celtics have on the offensive end of the floor. And did it change my thinking of it? It certainly made my belief in Boston's ability to compete consistently and maybe beat Toronto, who I'm a big believer in. Yes, I guess the answer to that question is yes, it did. I mean,
I can see you, and I can see the anguish on your face as you answer this question.
Yeah, it's Boston is fascinating to me. Tice, I'm going to be honest with you, I underestimated Tice from the outset in terms of what he could provide defensively. Is Robert Williams solidified himself as the backup center there, or does Cantor, in certain matchups become? I don't know. I mean, that's an interesting thing. I'll say this to you, like in that game, I thought Wanamaker, nothing. You look at Brad Wanamaker, and I go back to him at Pittsburgh. There is nothing eye-popping about Brad Wanamaker, not one thing. But you want to talk about strong as a rock, fearless, steady, do everything you want him to do. I had been worried about Boston's bench, and then, I see Brad do what he did in that game. I don't know.
Well, they need one perimeter guy off the bench every night, right? They need one guy. Wanamaker is your most likely suspect. They sprinkle in an Ojale or a Langford. Right. Because they have 6 starters, right? Let's call them 6. Smart is your 6th starter. Right. 5 of them are perimeter guys. So they don't need a whole lot of perimeter juice off the bench. They just need 10 good minutes from somebody. But You nailed it. To me, one of the lessons of that Toronto game was when Boston gets good minutes from its centers, they go from really good team to contender. And Tice was fantastic in that game. And to answer your question, Robert Williams is the Michael Porter Jr. of the East, not in terms of talent level, but in terms of, I think he's forced Brad Stevens to go, it's time. You're the backup center. Cantor will still get minutes because there are certain matchups where he's useful. But to me, he's going to make mistakes. He's a young player. The verticality he brings, the rim protection, the passing, he's a really good passer. I think it's just their upside is just higher if he's getting 15 minutes and Cantor's getting 5 or whatever it ends up being. And when their centers like Tice made those corner threes against Toronto, that game, to answer my own question, did change the way I feel about that series. I think Boston's size bothers Lowry and Van Vliet a little bit.
Absolutely the case. Look at what those 2 guys shot from 3. There's no question that bothers those guys.
And the other thing is Boston, according to Cleaning the Glass, is the number 1 transition defense in the league, and it's not close. And you could see against Toronto, they were especially attentive to all of their principles in transition defense, and they were going to force Toronto to beat them in the half court. And that is the one, not quite red flag, we'll say orange flag about the Raptors is, can they score enough in the half court? They're right around 15th, 16th in half court efficiency. And against Boston, the answer was no. And those things, I think in the aggregate against 29 teams, Toronto is a slightly better team than Boston. I think head to head, it's a toss up where I might lean Boston after watching them play enough times this year head to head.
What ultimately do you think, does the environment itself matter in the playoffs? The fact that there's no home court advantage, does it help the young guys maybe perform beyond expectations, where some of that tension in the building, the momentum swings of the home team? Do you think that this environment matters at all relative to success in the playoffs, Zach. And because I saw, and you said essentially what Kenny Smith said on TNT's show one night, which is when I watch the games, it feels to me, I know for the announcers and the people in the building, it feels different, but for the viewer at home, it does not. And you essentially said the same thing. But do you think the environment matters, and could it elevate somebody beyond where maybe their talent and their play and everything would dictate otherwise?
I'm so glad you asked that, because the stupid thing that I forgot up front, it's like one of the reasons there's all this tanking is that home court advantage doesn't exist. So it doesn't really matter, 4, 5, 2, 3, whatever.
Right.
A couple. You first look at the teams that are really good at home and really bad on the road, like Philly, and say, what does that mean? Now, maybe Philly's season is on the brink anyway with all the injuries, and I can't get there. But I just sort of, this is such an unknown that I've just sort of defaulted to, like, I'm going to trust the veteran teams, the teams that have guys who have been through lots of different situations and lots of high pressure moments. The other thing is, if I were one of these teams, I would be trying to get. I want to start planning now for like big games in the playoffs when someone on the other team is at the free throw line in a big moment. I want to get like a really surprising pop in the virtual fans. Like all of a sudden there's a giraffe wearing a party hat in the virtual. All of a sudden there's like Selma Hayek in the virtual fans, or like just something that's like, whoa, I'm starting. Teams need to start planning. Teams need to start planning for that.
Be the college teams that pretend to deliver a baby there on the end line. Right?
Something like there's Trump in the virtual. I'm like you could really have to think outside the box. What else did we not hit on, DB?
Can I give a moment of appreciation for Damian Lillard, because just going back to the start of the year where the guy had so much weight on his shoulders, and his willingness to absorb it, and then just watching him perform, I'll stand in awe sometimes of the guy's skill set, and then his leadership, and just the way he approached this. And he took some heat for saying I don't want to go down there if there isn't meaningful games, but you have to always, you can't take things out of context. What he said was correct. I agreed with it when he said it, and I agree with it now, because I would have liked to have seen that team with a healthy Nurkic and Collins throughout, because where would they be in the standings? How much more intriguing would the West be? So just a shout out to Damian Lillard for who he is as much as how he plays that.
Well, and just the way that he not only did he not hide from missing the free throws,
yes.
He said, he just straight face, not sneering, just said, I've put those guys out of the playoffs before. They can laugh at me all they want. They know what I did to them.
I agree. And then the humility to say in the Chris Haynes interview, Zach, to say, I'm not above failure. Like, what a message for young players out there. As hard as he works, no one is above failure. That's what I'm saying. There's something that's fun for me to watch as it relates to his basketball skill, but there's also this competitive greatness, and then this humility about this guy that is so, it's just compelling to me. He's really compelling.
The last thing, I forgot what I was going to say. I remember what I was going to say. The last thing about the lack of home court. Jeff Van Gundy brought this up the other night on the broadcast, and it's right and it's obvious, and it's something that's going to become a bigger story. We are right now living, the NBA is living, not by any choice of its own, an experiment. And the experiment is, how good is the basketball over a sustained period of time if these guys never have to travel? And if the answer is incredibly good, if we get to the finals and LeBron, if the Lakers are there, and LeBron's voice carries so much weight, if LeBron says, I've never felt like this in the finals before, this is incredible, the NBA has inadvertently produced evidence that travel, maybe, has inadvertently produced evidence that travel is so detrimental to the quality of play, and the lack of travel is such a boost to the quality of play, that they sort of like, do we really just go back to how it always was? I guess the answer, obviously there are 29 arenas you do, and you play 82 and you travel, but you almost look, all of the noise about the schedule and the wear and tear it brings becomes so much louder and more obvious, because now we have, if it unfolds this way truly, and so far the players are moving incredibly fast, the quality is amazing. If it unfolds that way, the NBA has this 3-month period where it's like, oh yeah, we did that thing once with no travel and it was awesome and everybody loved it.
They can't do it. I mean, the BRI, right?
But you can't do it, and you can't play in a bubble. The players have their families, but it will raise the volume on the discussion of is 82 really how many we want to play? How many, because now it's just really interesting. I thought it was a great point by Jeff.
It is a great point, and I thought, it was, but there's no answer to it, Zach. No. It goes to the great story, and forgive me, I can't remember who read it, and it was the real problem or whatever about the sleep deprivation, and all the travel, but the sleep deprivation that comes with that travel, and then all the other taxing things about travel.
What I'm saying is all the people who think the schedule should be 60 games, or 50 games will have a huge bullet now that they did not have before. Now maybe we get there and LeBron's like, I don't feel any different. I'm still worn down. It doesn't make a difference. I just think that's a potentially big story to monitor. All right, you got to go, DB. I don't want to keep you.
I got to go get tested. Thank you for having me.
Don't miss your test. Don't pull a Deandre Ayton. Get over there on time. Doris Burke.
I've almost forgotten it, so I totally get it for those players, because there's been a couple days where it's 10 of 1 and I'm panicking, oh my God, I've got to go get there.
How much distance do you have to cover? Do you have to, is there a mile sprint that you've got to do? Are they coming they're coming to you, right?
It's right in the hotel. I have to walk down to a ballroom. Yeah. It couldn't be easier.
All right, Doris, we'll reconvene during the finals. Thank you for your time. Have fun.
Yeah. Bye, Zach. Thanks.